Welcome to Building Integrity. I'm Josh Porter, and today we're going to be talking about the 2020 video walkthrough that has recently surfaced on YouTube of the Champlain Towers South, particularly the portion where the person recording it walks through the garage. I reached out to the person who recorded that video, that is Dr. Terenzi at FIU, and she was gracious enough to let me use that video for this content today. Before I get into that, though, I wanted to talk about two things. And the first thing is I was watching the local news, and they had John Pestorino on there, who is a forensic engineer, structural engineer. And he also wrote the 40-year recertification process for Miami-Dade. He has been hired by a law firm. I don't know what party he is working with as an expert, but he's going to be investigating this as part of the legal defense or offense prosecution type deal. The interesting thing that he said, though, in this interview, and I'm going to quote it here real quick, because it says, he said, "Concrete gives you a warning. It gives you a warning. It doesn't fail that fast." And he almost seemed, flabbergasted that this building collapsed, which I think a lot of us structural engineers are shocked and kind of flabbergasted that this building fell in the way that it did. So talking about that and talking about, the fact that he's been hired by a law firm, I wanted to talk about a little bit of the legal process real quick. In this situation, first off, you need to know everybody's going to get sued. Okay. But when we're talking about, let's say, the engineering firms that get sued, when an engineering firm gets sued, their insurance is going to come and they're going to usually pay for their defense. And what's going to happen is that whatever party is suing them is going to have an expert witness, and that expert witness is going to be a licensed professional engineer, and that licensed professional engineer is going to look at all the evidence, and he's going to conclude that that they did not follow a standard care for engineers, and that they were negligent, or however you want to say that. But then on the other side, on the defense side, they are also, the engineering firm won't be their own expert witness. Their attorney will find an engineer, an expert witness, and that expert witness will say, no, they followed all of the standard practices and standard care. And I don't want to be casting judgments either way. That's not my point of these videos. My point is to educate you guys on the process, educate you guys about structures and buildings, and teach you something along the way as we analyze the Champlain Towers South situation. But what it's going to come down to is if they don't settle, they will end up in court, and both sides and both experts will make their arguments, but all the evidence will be presented to the jury. And at the end of the day, the jury has to decide whether there's negligence here or not. And so as you watch this video and as you watch this analysis, I want you to put on your thinking cap and think like a juror, and try not to jump to conclusions. Try not to prejudge things. Look at the evidence, look at what's being told, and then kind of come to your own conclusions. All right, so let's jump into this. First, what we're going to do is we're going to watch the video portion as she walks through the garage. I've turned off the audio because it's not really necessary. And then I'm going to go and we're going to analyze some still frames of that video. So let's go ahead and get this thing playing. So she starts on the east, and I'll show you this on a key map. She starts walking on the west side of the building, underneath the driveway and underneath the above ground parking area. And I don't think, the intent was to necessarily record the condition. She just noticed some things and kind of looked up as she was going through this building. So this is the stair and elevator tower, which is part of the portion of the building that was remaining. And then as she walks past that, she starts walking towards the end of the building that did collapse. And from here, on this perspective, on her right is the pool deck, and on her left is the building. And these three columns that she's walking by right now are the columns that we talked about in previous videos, would be columns of concern that would be necessary to collapse in order to collapse this building. Okay. So some of it's a little shaky, but we're going to go through this. But before we do, I want to talk about some basic concepts. if we are, you'll need to know this kind of basic level construction and engineering stuff in order to understand what you just saw in that video and to make sense of it. So in this picture, we show typical columns and a slab spanning across the columns. Okay, this is kind of how it would be drawn on the drawings. Of course, I have no notes, no additional information. This is a very simple structure that I'm showing you. Now, as a load is applied to this, okay, and we draw that load with arrows, meaning that gravity is pulling that load down, okay, and as a load is applied to that slab will deflect. Okay, now this picture is sort of an over-exaggeration of how it would deflect, but we do this in order to make it visible and understanding of the principles that are involved. So when it deflects like this, you have to think of concrete as a very stiff material. It doesn't like to deflect. It doesn't like to stretch. And so what happens is like in the middle here, the concrete is pushing in on itself, okay, and we call that compression, but in the bottom, it's stretching apart, okay? We call that a tension force. So what happens is in a slab like this, the bottom of the slab would crack, okay? And it might have cracks that look like that. And at the bottom of each one, you'd have these series of cracks in the bottom of the slab. Okay, but the slab is designed, should be designed to not crack. So if the slab is not in this way, yeah, you know, there's an old adage where people say, well, you know, concrete's supposed to crack. But the reality is that concrete is designed to resist cracking or control cracking. And if it cracks, it needs to be explained like why it's cracking and why that cracking occurs. Okay, now this is a two-dimensional kind of cross-section view of what columns, you know, here's your columns, okay, and the rest is your slab. So this is sort of a two-dimensional view. So I'm going to show you kind of like a three-dimensional view of what's going on here. All right, so here you can see it's a plate slab construction, and you don't need to read all the text and understand all the stuff. But what I wanted you to take away from this is you can see this deflection type shape between the columns here, but in 3D, that deflection shape takes place in two dimensions. Okay, you got a curve there and you got a curve there. I don't know if you can see that. I'll draw it in the white area. So it curves like this, and when it deflects, it curves like that. Okay. And what this creates is that when this slab sags, if you will, in both directions, in a what we call a two-way action, okay? Don't worry about the one-way, don't worry about the catenary right now, and I'm sure you've heard catenary action in other videos mentioned, and I'm gonna do a video on that as well in the future. But right now we're just talking about two-way action, and we're talking about two-way membranes. When a slab, when a plate slab construction becomes overstressed, it will actually crack in diagonals. So here you can see you have your columns, okay, and as well up here. And so at each of the four corners you have columns. But this is just a sample from a test specimen out of a study on two-way action slab failure. And you can see that the primary cracking actually occurs in the diagonal directions. Now, it doesn't mean that it won't crack in the vertical directions, but the primary cracking is diagonal. So remember that, that's going to be important. Okay, so first off, I have a key. In order to orient you to what we're looking at, there's a key at the bottom left of this image, and that key shows a giant red arrow. That is the positioning of where she was standing when the camera was pointing that particular direction when I took this screen grab. And you're going to see that throughout the rest of these shots. The three red circles, of course, are the three columns. If you don't know why those are important, go back to my previous videos. But these three columns, 1, 2, or 3 of them would have been necessary for failure in order to trigger the rest of the collapse of the building. What caused the failure of those three is still something we're all exploring in this industry. In this picture, I wanted to draw your attention to this object up here at the top of the picture. This is actually corrugated plastic, and it's installed there where there was a big crack in order to deflect and move water away from the cars that are coming through the cracks. And I've seen this before in other buildings, and it's basically like a Band-Aid in order to keep expensive cars from getting damaged from the water that's coming through the ceiling. Now again, this is spot 105, 106, so this is over the drive area here, this is over the drive area. This is not part of the building that collapsed. But the information that we're going to gain from the west side and south side of the building is going to be useful information further on. All right, so let's get through these. Okay, so the interesting thing I thought was here is as she's looking to the south wall and the retaining wall, and she's looking at parking space 5254, one of the things that actually jumped out to me is, yeah, you have some water on the floor, okay? But we all know from if you've watched any of my previous videos and if you've listened to the news or anything, we all know that this garage has been dealing with water to the point where there might be a foot of water, a foot and a half of water reported in the floor of this thing. So it doesn't surprise me that, and we all know from the Morabito report that the slab above this the waterproofing was either not there or it was in terrible condition. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time pointing out every puddle on the ground. It's needless to say that we're all aware that the building has a lot of water problems and a lot of water in the garage. But one of the things I found really interesting was this slab here, and it appears to have been a pretty significant chunk of slab replacement in the concrete deck. And then where that slab was replaced, you have this rough concrete where it looks like maybe the joint spalled and they have done repairs to the spall. And that's interesting to me because this is below what we've all been looking at before, and this is going to tie into my next video. But I just wanted to point that out in this image, that was really unique and that was interesting. And you can see as we look further down that this line here continues all the way over. Okay, and the puddle that's sitting on top of it doesn't maybe necessarily correlate to a specific crack or anything above, but instead may be pertaining to the water coming up through that joint itself. Okay. So here is, we're looking now at parking spaces 54 and 55, and I wanted to kind of point out, you can see all these things sticking out from the ceiling, and a closer view of those is here. All right, now I want to explain to you what you're looking at because there's three different things you're looking at here. One of the things you're looking at when you see these white flecks like around this area, you're actually looking at paint that is peeling off of the ceiling. You can actually see a little bit of paint peeling here, and you can see back here that there's, you know, actually quite a bit of paint peeling and elsewhere around here, okay? So these are locations of peeling paint. Now, the other thing that you'll see on this is you will see these evenly spaced, you know, white dots, and you will see these white lines here. And what these are is these are injection ports that were left there. And so it's part of a practice when you want to inject a crack, either if you're going to inject it with epoxy, or you're going to inject it maybe with like a urethane to try to stop the water from leaking in. You're going to install these plastic ports, and then you're going to use them as injection spots in order to inject your product into the concrete cracks. And what happened in this case, and what happens I see a lot of times with contractors, is they never got rid of the ports. But not all of this dimpling and these artifacts can be described as ports. In this area that I've just circled, it appears to be more like stalactites, which you'll see later on in this video. But you can see this ceiling is generally got a lot going on, right? Okay, and as you look up from that last camera position, when she looks straight up, you can actually see the injection port here, okay? And you can see the injection ports down here. But between the injection ports, you can actually see stalactites. So here's some stalactites, here's some stalactites. And now the way you get those stalactites is water has to come from the top through the concrete. It pulls the calcium out of the concrete. It forms, it's a bit of a longer chemical process, but ultimately it ends up forming what's called calcium carbonate, which is this white powdery stuff that forms these stalactites at the ceiling. Okay, the other things to note in this picture is it looks like we have discolorations which appear to be rust. Okay, but given that this interesting object here is sort of hanging down, and it doesn't kind of make a lot of sense to a lot of people, what this tells me, and especially looking at the rust color, I should say, at this port right here, tells me that this looks like it was a location that was probably injected with urethane. And which was not effective. And so as the water keeps coming through and keeps rusting the steel, it actually colors the urethane. It's almost like can almost be like a sealant or a foam type material. And it looks like it actually discolored it, and some of that urethane looks like it maybe has fallen down and is hanging from the ceiling. At this point, that's just my best guess on this, but this does not look reminiscent of an epoxy injection to me. It looks more like a urethane injection, but pretty ugly. You can see the paint is peeling around here. We can see bare concrete, and then we can also see that the paint is peeling around this location as well. It just hasn't peeled off yet. Okay, so here we're walking down the garage a little bit. She's looking from the west to the east, but she is still in the covered parking, just below the covered parking area. And I just kind of wanted to point out, you've got a large area of peeling paint here. You've got a large area of peeling paint, maybe some injection ports, some other things going on. And then, of course, you have this very large area, which we're going to get closer to in a second. But the one thing that is a little difficult to see, and it took me, I had to really go by frame because, we walked through the garage so quick. You can see there's some sort of deformation or something here that looks like an angular crack. Okay, and I thought, oh, that's interesting, because if you remember back at the beginning when we started talking about the way these plate slabs bend and deflect, that they will crack usually in diagonals. That's the primary method of cracking if they're overstressed. So here we've got this diagonal crack, and in the next frame you can actually see that diagonal crack a little bit better. Okay, and you can actually see another crack here, and you can see that there's a crack here and maybe a crack here, and then you've got this like circular motion towards the center. Now this crack is pointing from one column crosswise to another column. So it's pointing from the column you can't see over to this column that you can see. And so this is very indicative to me of a slab, of a two-way functioning slab that is overstressed. Now, if we go on to the next image, okay, we can actually see, let me go back and make sure I've got myself oriented. Okay, so that's spot 50. So here's a little bit different view. We've moved on a little bit further. So here's that circular cracking I was talking about. Okay, we can't see the crack anymore that goes up, and we can't really see well, you can kind of see a little bit of these cracks, okay? But that correlates to this circle over here, okay? Same one. All right, but then as we move on from parking space 50 to this column, you can see that there's another crack line. And you can see the injection ports hanging from it. So another diagonal crack. Now there could be a crack going the opposite diagonal direction, but because of the way the light hits the crack and the way the camera is angled, we just may not be able to see it. But again, another angular crack from cross column to cross column. All right, so then as the video, and I'm just going in order and that the video went in generally. So when we turn around, you can see down here in the key in the bottom left, she's now looking at the vestibule with the elevators in them, and she's looking at these spots. The one thing I wanted to point out in this picture is, again, the corrugated plastic on the ceiling, and you can see a little bit of something there, but I don't think that's as important because we can't really conclude anything from that line. But you can see the corrugated plastic paneling on the ceiling. And again, the only reason you would put that up there is to keep water off of the cars, and the only reason why you would have that much water coming through to even get onto cars is because there's a crack there. Now, the interesting thing about this is this corrugated panel, if we can assume that there's a crack over this corrugated plastic, notice that it is, if there's a crack over that, it's perfectly perpendicular to the edge of the slab, because the slab actually changes elevation there. And that actually fits because at the edge of a slab, a plate slab construction does not behave as a two-way slab, it behaves as a one-way slab. And in a one-way slab, you would expect the cracks in a distressed concrete to be perpendicular to the edge of the concrete. So this actually fits with where it's located. And this, again, lends more evidence to the fact that the slabs were cracking under heavy stress. Okay, if you just look a little bit over to the left, here you've got that plastic again, that corrugated plastic, and then you have, now it's gone as far as it can, and over here, this slab becomes two-way. So from right about here, you've got one-way action slab, And so your crack would be perpendicular to the slab edge, okay? And then over here you have two-way. Well, in a two-way slab, again, like we talked about before, you would expect the cracks to be angular. Well, here's your angular crack coming off from that crack. All right, and these would probably connect under there. So this all fits with what I'm talking about as far as the way that we would expect a distressed crack, a distressed plate slab, two-way plate slab to crack, and what the cracks actually look like. And crack geometry is so important for this industry and for our career, and a lot of people don't know how to read or understand crack geometry to determine, is it just a crack, or is it indicative of something more serious? Okay. So moving on, you can see now we're back towards the south side looking at the parking spaces 40 and whatnot, and you can just see the amount of paint peeling off of the ceiling. Now the reason why all this paint would be peeling off of the ceiling and coming down is because when concrete is very saturated and very wet, and that water is bringing down with it that calcium chloride that I mentioned before, that calcium mineral out of the concrete, and that leaves that white powdery substance. Well, that white powdery substance actually pushes the paint off of the concrete, and so the paint has nothing to stick to anymore because it can't stick to a powder, and so it flaps down and it hangs down. So this is just, all of this peeling paint in the ceiling is just very indicative of a very, very wet concrete in a very wet environment. And then of course, again, you can see the corrugated plastic here, and you can see the corrugated plastic here, which means there are cracks over those areas. Okay, so now we start heading toward the area of the building that collapsed. If you look down in your key, I will draw roughly the building collapsed something like this, you know, and then it kind of went around the pool, and that is like your area of collapse. So now you can see where the red arrow is, that we are beginning to walk into that area and look that way. Now you can only see column 2, and you can see column 1, okay? But what's interesting is now you can begin to see that there is this, you know, corrugated, here's that corrugated plastic again. We can't really see where it's at. We'll pick that up in the next frame, but again, we're moving on down. This white Jeep here, okay? This white Jeep is actually parked in parking space 77, so it's parked right here. All right, just to kind of give you guys an orientation. So your ramp is just beyond, and again, these three circles here are indicating the columns that we suspect would have had to have gone. She turns a little bit to the right, that picks up column 3, and then you can still see column 2 and 1 in her vision. Actually, no, I'm sorry, this is column 2. So she stepped forward, and this is column 2, and this is now column 1. And then here you can see that corrugated plastic. And notice the orientation of the corrugated plastic, okay? It's not at an angle, it's actually at a perpendicular location, and it's very close to the columns, which we didn't see in any of the previous video, that these corrugated plastic was right up against columns. That's really interesting and odd for this location. So I'll show you exactly where, and again, the corrugated plastic, I think it's reasonable to assume that the corrugated plastic is there because there's a crack there, and we're trying to keep the water off of the cars, right? So if you look at the pool level plan, okay, you'll see that in this orangish color here, okay, this is the area where we know that the concrete and the planter boxes collapsed. We can see that in that video that was recorded about 7 minutes before. I did a video on that video, and you can see the debris. I call it debris and rubble, but we know that that's generally this square, okay? And so it's shaded orange. That plastic that you see here, okay, that I've circled, that corrugated plastic, is this red rectangle here. Okay, that's exactly where it's located. And so that's really interesting, because what that tells me is if I've got this plastic and it's perpendicular to the line of the beams, okay, the beams are right here. So if it's perpendicular to the line of the beams and it's located where it's located, and you look at it on the plans and you transpose that, well, that's right where the deck meets the planter box. Okay, so you can see that. So this is deck, whoops. Okay, so this is deck here, and then this is one of your planter boxes right here. So that crack is right where the deck meets the planter box. That's interesting, and that's something that will be useful as the forensic engineers that are really on site and really doing this. They will use this video, and trust me, they will use that piece of information. Again, you can't draw a conclusion from that piece of information, but it's like another piece to the puzzle, right? And we're trying to solve the puzzle. That's what they will be trying to do. Okay. And then here you can see that plastic a little bit better in that location. She's almost staring straight at this column here right at the end of location 70, or of parking space 77 and 76. And again, you can see all of the peeling paint, maybe old injection ports, stalactites, just a bunch of a mess going on the ceiling on this location to the right of that column. Okay, now this area here between this column and us is the drive, this main drive going through. And you can see that on the bottom key where she's looking that way, but she's still concealed or behind column 1. And so what this is column 1 here, obviously, and column 2 and column 3. So she's behind, and I may have misnumbered them before. No, I don't think I did. But anyway, so this is column 1, and then this is the drive area through the middle of the garage. Now, one of the things I want you to notice in this image, and she pans a little bit to the left here, is this area here, okay, has a bunch of stuff going on. It has a blister, a paint blister. It has a bunch of stalactites and peeling paint. I mean, the whole thing, it looks like a series of cracks. It just looks like a mess, okay? And she actually steps forward, or steps to the left a little bit towards the ramp, and she turns back, and you can actually see this difference. So I want to go back real quick. In this image, though, you don't see any issues here. It looks clean, and I've watched this video a couple times. It's not just like that; it's blurry or anything. There is a sharp cutoff point where all of this looks looks bad, if you will, and this looks good. Okay, so just from visual, that doesn't mean it is structurally good or it is structurally bad, but it just looks, this part looks bad, that part looks good, right? Okay, so as you go to the next frame, you can see, okay, well, there's a ledge here where the slab changes elevation. All right, and where is that ledge in relationship? And again, I highlighted that this is the bad portion, right? So I'm highlighting this red area as being the bad looking portion, the portion that has a high water content. It has efflorescence, it has peeling paint, and so on. And if you transpose that area onto the area of debris that fell, that is this reddish or pinkish rectangle here that I just circled on the drawing. That location is the location that is this, right? So and then over here where it looks, pretty good, this area is this area over here. And so you can see that there's a transition here between the planters, which are located here, and the upper level of the deck, which is up here. So there's this transition point right along here where it drops down, and it looks relatively good to the north, and it doesn't look so great to the south. And the reason why this is important is because, again, this area here, this whole area above that's in this picture, is the area that collapsed. And so you can see that there was some serious problems going on with the planters in this area. The other thing I want to point out in this picture, and I'll go back to this picture as well, is if you look at this beam here, okay, this beam, you can actually see, and if you may not be able to see it in my video, you can go back and watch her video, and I'll put it in the description, a link to it. But you will see that this beam here looks very gray and washed out. The paint has almost completely peeled off of this beam. You can see a little bit of paint hanging on here, a little bit of paint hanging on here, a little bit of paint hanging on here. You can see that over here. You got your peeling paints here and here and here, okay? But for the most part, this beam is very gray in color, okay? And then it's got like a mottled whiteness to it. And some, unfortunately, with frozen frames, sometimes it's less it's easier to see things in motion than not. But if you go back and watch this, you'll see that this thing has hardly any paint on it. Well, why is that significant? Well, that means that that whole beam is saturated almost constantly. It's indicative, I should say, that it's saturated constantly and that it's a very wet environment, because again, very wet concrete will leach out those calcium carbonates, and that calcium carbonate will push the paint off but leave like a white hazy color over, a white chalky color over the concrete. And that's exactly what we see here. We see like a concrete color with a white chalkiness, and they can't seem to keep paint on the thing to get it to stick. And that's why we see the peeling paint. Okay. So this area here, I was saying that this is the area that we saw the collapse. I wanted to show that photo again. The purple columns, I'm going to label these, column A and column B, okay? And when we come over here and we look at the video, this is a still from the video 7 minutes or so before the collapse. You can see, let's see how I named them. Okay, so you can see that this is column A right here, and this is column B. And then you can see the debris is here, right? And so, so this is your debris area. There's your column A, there's your column B. And then if you go back and you transpose that onto the drawing, here's your column A, here's your column B, and here is your debris area. I'll circle it again. Here's your debris area that now again, and I've said this before in the previous video, more than this might have fallen before the rest of the building collapsed. But the only thing we can confirm from this video is that this area of debris that's on the ground, the concrete and stuff that has fallen, generally correlates to this area right here. Okay. So finishing up her walkthrough of the building, it's interesting. I think she was looking for her parking space, and she found it. So the video pretty much came to a conclusion. But one of the things I want to point out that's really interesting, right towards the end of the video, the whole time in the video, you're either looking down and you're looking at water, or you're looking up and you're looking at corrugated plastic, cracks, efflorescence, stalactites, injection ports, all sorts of stuff that are going on the ceiling. But if you look at this key, she's standing generally right at the bottom of the ramp, and she's looking east, and you can see this crack on the slab. And this is something nobody has really talked about yet too much. Like we've been talking basically from the garage up to the planter deck. Why did the planter deck collapse? How did the building collapse? Was it catenary action? And all these things that are being proffered out there as ideas and theories. But nobody has really talked about the foundation of the building. And if you come over here, you can see that that crack actually proceeds and continues on in front of the ramp area. And you can actually see that there's another crack here. And if you remember going back earlier into the video, you can see there's a joint here that looks like it's been, had some spalling issues and some repairs and things. And if you remember going back earlier in this video, I showed you things that were on the ground that looked very suspicious. Looked like parts of the concrete had been replaced. So that's what I want you guys to keep in mind, because on our next video, we're actually going to be covering issues related to the foundation. How was the piling system designed? How was this ground floor slab designed? And why does that matter to the investigators as they will be proceeding with their research and with their investigation into the causality of this collapse? Anyway, that's all I have for today for this video. I appreciate you guys watching. Take care.